Hi, I'm Sara.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction, who are we and what are we doing?
Sara, what movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about And the Band Played On. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of homophobia, criminal-level government inaction, embarrassing misinformation that resulted in cruelty and passivity, rightful public shaming, Alan Alda being kind of a dick, Kaposi's sarcoma, and Ronald Reagan. Sara, I feel like I left out a ton of stuff.
We're seeing some public shaming that back in the day when people used to respond to being shamed by feeling shame, which is interesting. It's kind of like an emotional phone book where we have to explain to our younger audience what shame is because they don't see it very often anymore.
Agreed.
But you're going to see government officers feeling ashamed and course correcting, which is something you don't see anymore in America. We'll point it out when we get there.
You're going to see dedicated, nerdy, wonky government workers who value competence and civility operating at the top of their game, which is not a thing that people value anymore. And over 30 years after its making, I felt like this was a swan song for appreciating competency.
And it's barely appreciated in this movie, but in comparison to where we are now, it is like a tour through it's like the Palace of Versailles. Like, we're going to be pointing at it and being like, this is an era gone by, when we used to believe scientists and when telling someone that they should be ashamed of themselves actually resulted in them feeling shame. Like, you're about to go on a journey through a world that doesn't exist anymore.
There is a Confederate flag hanging in a lunchroom. It's Georgia and it's the 1980s.
I mean, there's probably still a Confederate flag hanging in a lunchroom in Georgia in the year of our Lord 2025. Let's be real.
I just felt like I didn't quite go as all in on the trigger warning as I normally do, and yet there was so much, but it was deadly serious.
Tonight's going to be tough, because I'm furious.
Yes. Also, this is the fourth film in our Pride Month 2025 series. Yes. We're still recognizing Pride Month, even in this brave new world where all people are the same, so you shouldn't celebrate any particular group.
Get it while you can, kids.
Yeah, before we get hauled off to the gulag.
And with that also, is there a spoiler warning beyond that part of our lives that's coming?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include the book And the Band Played On by Randy Shilt. And I did a lot of reading about Aaron Spelling and the making of this movie. And I'm going to flag in particular an amazing interview he gave with the Television Academy several years ago about the making of this movie.
I've read And the Band Played On at least twice. It's an excellent book. We have a bouquet of caveats for you around something that Randy Shilt got wrong, but he was an incredible literary journalist, and he has been gone for 40 years, and he died quite young of AIDS, and we could have used his voice the past few decades.
Sure could have.
Sara, can you please tell us a little bit about the 1993 HBO movie And the Band Played On? We consider this an ensemble biopic about the many people that Randy Shilt wrote about in And the Band Played On.
There are many, many scientists and heroes in this movie. I want to name just some of them. There's not enough time to go through all of their Wikipedia entries, but just to kick them off. Bill Krause, Dr. Dodd Francis, Dr. Mary Guinan, Dr. James Curran, Dr. William Darrow, Dr. Robert Gallo, Dr. Selma Dritz, Dr. Harold Jaffe, Dr. Luc Montagnier, Dr. Francois Barr, Dr. Marcus Conant, Dr. Willie Rosenbaum, Bobby Campbell, and Roger Gale Lyon. And then the film And the Band Played On. It's a 1993 American television film. It's directed by Roger Spottiswoode. And the teleplay is by Arnold Schulman, and it's based on Randy Shilt's book. It premiered at the Montreal World Film Festival on September 2nd and was broadcast on HBO on September 11th, 1993.
This movie has everybody. My guess is that everyone who had lost someone or knew someone who had lost someone wanted very much to be a part of it in whatever capacity the script allowed. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a conversation at some point that went, "I'm sorry, Miss Taylor, but we have no cameos left."
This was a hugely important moment for HBO and what can be accomplished on non-network television. So Roger Spottiswoode is a very workmanlike director. There's nothing flashy about the making of this movie, about the editing. It's very point the camera, make sure it's in focus. He directed The Best of Times, which is a little known Robin Williams and Kurt Russell gem from the 80s, Turner and Hooch, Tomorrow Never Dies, the James Bond movie. He also worked as an editor earlier in his career on Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, the James Caan movie, The Gambler. Editors often make really good, efficient filmmakers, and my exhibit A in this is always Walter Murch, who edited the conversation, but really kind of directed that because Coppola was so caught up in his various Godfathers. I would like to shout out Aaron Spelling and his producing partner, E. Duke Vincent. Aaron Spelling, as you know, I'm a very big 90210 fan, unironically. And if you cast yourself back into 1993 when this came out, Ronald Reagan is still alive, and this is a pretty elegant indictment of his and his administration's inaction. I want to be clear, when I say inaction, I am also implicating all that follows inaction, which is the cruelty, the ignorance, the fear, the spread of misinformation, all of the things that come from that inaction, which are catastrophic. This is a really bold choice for polite Southern Californians who all tried to get along. I would also mention that Aaron Spelling also cast Rock Hudson on Falcon Crest in 1984 when Rock Hudson was hiding the fact that he had AIDS but was very much dying. And I'm going to speculate wildly here because I don't know Mr. Spelling's mind, but I would expect that this death affected him very deeply, in addition to his public comments on the matter. And for all the people who do mock 90210, and there's plenty to mock about that show, as a scholar of the show, I can say that this was a show that was consistently dedicated to promoting safe sex, abstinence, regular STD testing, and AIDS awareness throughout its run, which was particularly groundbreaking for 1990. And I think that 90210 was part of our generation's enormous sex education, which we are really blessed to have experienced. I think that we were remarkably well informed by the media being really responsible. And also because of that, our education being really responsible about teaching us what all these things were and what we needed to do. Also, Aaron Spelling worked on this for over 4 years. He explained that ABC turned it down cold. NBC developed a script and then decided not to shoot it. And then he got a call from HBO's Bob Cooper, and they said they wanted to do it. And the first person he booked to be in the film, because he knew he had to get some prominent names in it, was Richard Gere. He called up Richard Gere, and Richard Gere signed on without reading the script. He said, "Don't bother sending me the script. I will do it." And that opened up everyone else's willingness to participate. And HBO had the guts to do this movie. So good for all of these people involved in this.
Yeah. As you know, Sarah, my mother would not allow me to watch Beverly Hills 90210. So I've been under the impression this whole time that the cure for AIDS is to drink bleach.
Oh, no, it's actually ivermectin. It's a miracle drug.
Cool.
I feel like we should open up our bouquet of caveats regarding patient zero, and maybe you can just give us like a primer on what gets taken away from the story with the truth behind patient zero and what is still like, just tell us what we need to pull apart in our heads as we're addressing this.
So patient zero is the elephant in the room here. Patient zero was a Quebecois man, an Air Canada flight attendant named Gaetan Dugas, who is a very sinister figure in the book. And Randy Shilt tells the story quite dramatically. And in the past 10 years or so, evidence came out that Randy Shilt got that wrong, that perhaps Gaetan Dugas was not that bad or sinister of a guy. And the way it's told in the book is, so Gaetan Dugas claimed to have had sex with hundreds of people a year, and there were these stories in the book about him where, when it was called gay cancer, he would go into bathhouses and have random sex with men with the lights off and then turn the lights up so they could see all of his Kaposi's sarcoma things and say, I have gay cancer and now you have it too. It is very dramatically told in the book, and it's told where his rationale was, well, somebody gave this to me, and he comes across as a monster. Much of this story has been debunked. It turned out that the strain that he was spreading was not the big strain. And there have been people who've come forward and said that Gaetan Dugas was a nice guy. So Randy Shilt got that wrong, and we see Gaetan Dugas in the film. We didn't know that story was off. But if you exclude Patient Zero, it's still an excellent book. It's far worthier of a read than, say, Bob Woodward's Wired, or there are many, many books out there that are a waste of time. And The Band Played On is not. Shilt was operating based on his best and extensive research as someone who had covered the epidemic from the very beginning. So that is my bouquet of caveats for you.
I think it's also worth mentioning that the dramatic dark stories do not make their way into this motion picture. Gaetan is portrayed as a human, and certainly not as someone who is deliberately spreading disease in the moments that we spend with him.
No, this is very much an ensemble piece. Matthew Modine's character, Don Francis, is kind of a unifying thread. There's a piece of me that I would love to see how this would have looked as like a 3.5 hour Bob Altman movie.
Yeah, in this day and age too, I think this could be a 10-part series.
That's what we do today. And I think you may have touched on, there was the possibility of doing it as a 2-night special.
That was what NBC was going to do before they decided not to move forward.
In terms of what you said about Aaron Spelling, that's crazy about ABC, because that was his network. Like, NBC was Tartikoff's network, ABC was Spelling's.
Yeah, and they passed outright. Mm-hmm. You see why, and The Band Played On crawled so that shows like The Sopranos could walk and HBO could make bolder choices, and why we got a golden age of television, and why premium channels were able to run circles around network television is because network television wasn't willing to take the kind of chances, and they certainly weren't in a position to either. To be fair to network television, they're reliant on advertisers and things that HBO just doesn't have to worry about.
Well, and at the time on network television, you had to do, I think Standard Order was over 26 episodes in a season.
24 episodes, it was a full season. 13 is a half season.
I love tracing that development of peak TV that begins with HBO making bold choices. I hadn't watched And the Band Played On in at least 7 years or so, and I misremembered a lot. I thought that I remembered seeing characters from here under different names in The Normal Heart, but I was projecting the book, which I've read a few times, onto the movie. The movie And the Band Played On mostly cuts the East Coast stories that happen in the book version of And the Band Played On, and then happen again in The Normal Heart, which was written by Larry Kramer, who was a very active, very get under your skin activist who did a lot of good, and a lot of people don't like him, and I don't care. The only case I found on cursory examination of character overlap was that there is a Bill Krause in Milk, and that Stephen Spinella appears in all 3 films. Then I cross-referenced with When We Rise, and at this point my brain started to feel like the Crazy Room board from A Beautiful Mind.
Bill Krause is also in the documentary, the Life and Times of Harvey Milk, the 1984 documentary.
And I went back and looked at that and for a comparison, and I'll get to that later. Even with the fictionalized names, The Normal Heart better documents Larry Kramer's real story, as retold in the New York sections of the book And the Band Played On, better than roughly at least a quarter of the biopics that we've covered that use people's real names. So one of the things I appreciate about And the Band Played On is that there was no attempt to tack on a heterosexual love story. I think that was sadly a brave choice in 1993. If this had been a network miniseries, I will bet you that they would have inserted a PG-13 rated love story between Mary Guinan and Don Francis.
This movie does not have time for that, which
Thank
I love.
God, I don't need your boring straight people having a chaste kiss for no good reason. And this is a great ensemble piece. It's full of thoughtful, heartfelt cameos and supporting performances from allies, and AIDS was still a death sentence when this was made. First, it killed people very quickly. Then there was AZT and some other drugs that prolonged it a bit. But at this point, like, your life expectancy with AIDS was quite short. And then one day, junior year, I think it was, of high school, I remember a New York Times headline about something called The Cocktail. And by our mid-20s, it had become an inconvenience. So long as you live in a first world country and have health insurance, or live in a first world country where the state takes care of that.
I think it's also worth noting that, who fixed that shit was scientists again. We open in 1976 and we see that Dr. Don Francis, who's Matthew Modine, is trying to deal with an Ebola outbreak that happened in, I did not clock which country this was in, and I apologize for that. But he is in a country where there is an Ebola outbreak and they are trying to stop it from spreading, and they do. He is asked by a child, why did this happen? You're a doctor, why don't you know? And he doesn't have an answer for it. There's not a simple answer. And then we watch them burn the bodies, and they do stop the outbreak, not without people dying. And this film explains that it was contained, and it's a warning, as these things always are. And we cut to Paris in 1976, where we see a woman dying and her immune system has failed. And that is the first case. And then we see another man in Paris dying. One of the things this movie does really well, and again, like, credit to Roger Spottiswoode and to the writers and to Aaron Spelling, this movie crams in a lot of information and puts us in a lot of different places, but it flows very nicely. Like, it keeps a very cohesive narrative. We're meeting the French doctors who are going to be working in concert with the CDC and with jerk store Alan Alda, who we'll get to, in order to try and figure out what the heck this is and then how it can be treated. We cut to 1980, where Bill Krause, who is a congressperson's aide in San Francisco is advocating for gay people's rights as part of the DNC's platform as Jimmy Carter runs for re-election. We all know how well that went.
Ian McKellen is too old for this part. He's a wonderful actor, but at the start of the film, he is 20 years older than Bill Krause was at the time. I think he's miscast. I hear British received pronunciation leaking through all the time. Bill Krause was born in Kentucky and grew up in Ohio.
I agree. He is miscast when you see what Bill Krause looks like, but he's Ian McKellen. You don't chase him out of your movie. He's wonderful in this. Reagan wins. And let's open the gates on a decade of unmitigated, endless cruelty that continues to this day. Blanket statement, and I apologize. Fuck Ronald Reagan.
If you want to hear 50 minutes of us complaining about Ronald Reagan, listen to the Reagan episode, which I believe was episode 20, but we also did a bonus episode about the miserable experience of sitting through the Reagan movie. And when they cut in footage of Reagan, it does have a nightmarish quality to it, which it certainly has for the community that was messed over, because people who Ronald Reagan wished would disappear were the ones who got AIDS.
He used that folksy charm as a way to usher in just an astonishing amount of cruelty-based politics. It was just like let's fuck people over and harm them, which persists to this day. Back in the movie, we're seeing another case in the United States where someone's immune system is just gone. That's the diagnosis. We cut to the CDC in 1981. These scenes are filled with some wonderful actors. Glenn Headley, who we lost too soon, who is just a magical, magical woman. Saul Rubinek, who's also a very good character actor. She is on to the outbreak, and you're saying it's New York, it's San Francisco, it's Los Angeles.
There's this guy who's obsessive about getting his peanut butter cookies out of the vending machine. And I love that they cast character actors who we think of them as that guy. We've seen them a bunch of times. They have Matthew Modine there and Richard Gere there to be beautiful. I like that they cast people who look like nerds, that nobody is that fabulously dressed. And this is one of those things that's kind of tricky when you are making something about 10 years after, where there hasn't been that big of a style change, but you're aware of what started to look ridiculous and you don't want people to look ridiculous.
They accomplished something that Spotlight accomplished, which is setting a movie in the recent past and making people look like they were doing the jobs that they were doing. Which isn't always easy. And like a lot of these dudes are kind of normal looking dudes, but Glenn Headley is beautiful. And they make her look like a normal doctor. And Mary Gwynnon is very a striking woman also.
Yeah.
In real life.
Like her shirts don't fit perfectly. She has on a button-down shirt and it kind of tugs over the chest, because finding a button-down that fits when you're a woman is very hard to do. And that's like normal. So yeah, everyone who is not fabulous looks like they should bought things off the rack in 1981. So it's not that big of an effort in 1992, but it's nicely done for what it is.
There's a lot of very quotidian push and pull happening in the midst of this very life or death situation, which is that we see that Saul Rubinek, as the head of this department, has to toe a certain government line and has to work within the system. And they're saying this is affecting homosexual men. And he's like, we got to take that word out of this warning that we're about to issue, because otherwise it's not going out at all, because the Reagan administration will not allow for such a thing.
Richard Mazur shows up as one of the CDC doctors, and I thought, it's that guy. I've never seen him so young before. The places I remember him from are Orange is the New Black and Transparent.
I am sure it won't surprise you that I have a crush on Richard. Also, Charles Martin Smith shows up, who I adore. I don't know what he's like in real life, but anytime I see him in something, he is like the happy warrior who is like, he is going to battle and he is going to go hard. He radiates joy in every performance I've seen him in, including the really weird Disney movie Never Cry Wolf. And they're just like this delightful crew of wonky science geniuses trying to figure out what's happening and trying to mitigate this disease. We meet this young man who is dying. He has Kaposi sarcoma. He is in the hospital. He is, in the very late stages of this. He's showing his portfolio of his work as a drag queen. We find out that Kaposi sarcoma is a skin cancer that most typically afflicts Italian men who are in their 60s. It's baby Steven Spinella. And he's like, do I look like an Italian man in my 60s? And it's like, no, you look like baby Steven Spinella.
Yeah, in another great work to come out of the AIDS crisis, I believe Steven Spinella was the original Prior Walter in Angels in America.
Yes.
He's playing with a Rubik's Cube, and he talks about, as a metaphor for, is there any way to solve this? And I will have him know that I have solved many Rubik's Cubes. There is a way to solve a Rubik's Cube. Peel off the stickers and move them so that the sides match. It works every time.
We also, at this point, Glenn Headley meets Gaetan, patient 0, erroneous patient 0. She's asking him some questions and she's like, how many sexual partners do you have a year? And he's like, a year? He is a sexually active man living his life. I am not here to pass judgment on that. We go with Charles Martin Smith and we meet Lily Tomlin, who's playing Dr. Selma Dritz, and she and Ian McKellen and Charles Martin Smith are all touring San Francisco, and they go to a bathhouse, and Lily Tomlin explains the appeal of the bathhouse to Charles Martin Smith with a lot of compassion and education and no judgment. I really appreciated that even the people like Alan Alda, who we'll get to in this movie, I don't feel like this movie judges anyone in a way that feels like someone's a villain.
No, I don't think so either. It's a very compassionate film. I understand why they feel like closing the bathhouses is trying to drive everyone back into the closet. There was certainly a very large contingency in the gay community that saw monogamous relationships as a thing for straight people and being more poly as part of this new existing in society that was acceptable or expected.
Yeah, and this movie just like very easily explains, like, I feel like in the cold light of day of the year of our Lord 2025, some of this movie feels a little like preachy / over explaining, like Edward G. Robinson, like turning to the camera and explaining how insurance fraud works in Double Indemnity. But also, like, this is probably a lot of people's first encounter with some of these concepts, and with like being told not to judge them and needing to hear the reasons why they shouldn't be judging them. And she's explaining this to Charles Martin Smith. You can have anonymous sex with any gorgeous woman that you want to in here and then walk away from it. You would do it. And he's like, yeah, good point. And honestly, like, the other thing is too, like, I hate that we care beyond the public health issue of this and the concern for people's lives. Why does it matter? We have a cameo here from Phil Collins, who, as you may recall, was first in line to volunteer to replace Keith Moon pretty much at his funeral, which was generous of him. To your point, like, the bathhouse battle that goes on here is really unfortunate. And we meet, and Bill's in a monogamous relationship with BD Wong, who is like, just like baby BD Wong in this. He's so tiny and adorable.
So IRL, Kiko Gavantes was from Cuba, but if BD Wong is up for your movie, you put him in your movie.
As we're like cutting back to the CDC, like, we see that they've got the gist of what is happening here, but they don't have the proof. Mm-hmm. And Saul Rubinek keeps saying to them, no, but can't prove, because that is what they have. Like, this is a good reminder, this film, of like how messy scientific discovery is, and how the process doesn't suit like our simpleton brain rotted times in which we live. For a lot of people, they can't handle the fact that like more information can emerge sometimes. So that means it's a lie. And you know what? Like the other like big battle we're setting up here is this age old struggle of needing time that we don't have to get to the truth that we need in order to prove that certain steps need to be taken. They're already onto the fact that this has a 100% fatality rate. And also they have janky equipment because like, why would the Reagan administration fund, discovery of anything? Have I mentioned in the last 10 minutes that Ronald Reagan is fucking garbage?
Yes. So we meet Bobby Campbell, who was one of the early AIDS patients, and he is played by baby Donald Logue. Anything that I think of where I've seen him, he looks more rough-hewn, but he is such a pretty boy in this.
And we also meet Richard Gere, who is playing a character called the choreographer. He's basically an avatar for Michael Bennett, who did have a different journey with this disease in terms of how long he lived. But that's essentially who he is in this movie. And he's going to see Dr. Guinan. He's asymptomatic. Gere's only in this for a little bit. One thing that Richard Gere does so well in this movie is that his performance is profoundly moving. He really captures in his time on screen the existential dread and fear that these men and eventually women faced, knowing that they were ill, knowing that there was no way to cure it, knowing that no one cared, and that the sort of Damocles is just kind of hanging over them and they don't know when they're done, but it's coming. And to me, this was like the first moment where I was like, this is a horror movie. I find his moments in this film incredibly devastating.
He's also beautiful in this.
Back at the CDC, that Dr. Francis, that's Matthew Modine, is feeling it so deeply. They've been injecting samples into mice, rabbits, guinea pigs. We're seeing a lot of like old school science happening in this too, like doing like contact tracing with notepads and things like that. We're back in France. We're seeing more people dying of pneumocystitis, which is part of the late stage AIDS disease package, for lack of a better way of phrasing that. Like one of those things that you get as an effect of having no immune system. Bill is in San Francisco fighting to get insurance for gay men they're calling it GRID now.
What GRID stood for was gay-related immune deficiency.
Yeah, we find out Reagan is saying that they're not going to give any public health support, and he's been kind of like fudging whether or not they're getting the public health support, and nothing ever changes with these fucking monsters. We're seeing clips on television of, like, because there is this disease and it's whispered about, but no one in the government is saying anything about it or lending any support or acknowledging that it exists. There is this void of bullshit that is happening. We're hearing evangelists talking about the gay plague from the most prominent Christians who advise our presidents, because nothing says Christian like calling this a gay plague. Nobody has any information because no one is being an authority on it. And Modine starts to put together the pieces that there's some sort of invading force that is gobbling up people's T cells, and they're connecting the dots slowly between HIV and feline leukemia, and kind of figuring out like this is a retrovirus. So who do they call?
Welcome to the show, Alan Alda, the man who made nasal sexy.
I am also in love with Alan Alda, but he is a real douche canoe in this. Dr. Gallo is really a man who is far too pleased with himself.
And he gets in the way of discovery because he wants his name on things.
Yeah, and he's at the National Institute of Health. And we see Richard Masur, talking to this man who is dying. He's talking about how everyone around him that he loved has died except him. And at this point, it occurred to me that like this movie is filled with like the most compassionate faced actors. Like Charles Martin Smith Richard Major, Glenn Headley. These are all the faces I would want to see to comfort me in these moments. We return to patient 0.
Oh, this is great because we get to see how payphones work. Richard Mazer finally gets a hold of Gaetan Dugas, and he tells him, you can call me between 6 and 6:30. So you see Richard Mazer trying to get to a payphone where people are constantly dodging in front of him, and he eventually has to push someone out of the way so he can go over this list of people that Gaetan Dugas may have had sex with. People have to use landlines and go to payphones. People have to actually pick up the phone. It's crazy.
You have to have quarters with you all the time. Modine is really pushing back on wanting to be out and talking about this with the world and fill that information void. And Saul Rubinek is like, you can't. We don't have the proof. And he says, the house is on fire. You don't wait for scientific proof. We see B.D. Wong come home to a house filled with yelling activists and leaders. Someone makes the point about the disease and the fact that there's no one talking about it and says, if it was killing virgins and grandmothers. And I'm like, yeah, guess it depends on how much money they make and what color they are. And even then, sometimes we don't actually care. It depends basically on if they are in Lindsey Graham's house at the time and related to him. And even then, it might not actually matter. And B.D. Wong is leaving Bill. And he has met someone else. And then we cut back to the choreographer, and Dr. Francis goes to see him, and he's like, I think I've got this thing. And he says that he's scared, and he mentions, why am I so afraid to tell anyone about this?
You see that he's doing a rehearsal, and there's kind of a funeral motif to the piece that he's directing.
And in real life, Michael Bennett left half of his estate to AIDS research. We cut to Matthew Modine speaking to an audience of gay men in San Francisco. And he's saying, if you get this disease, you will die, and you will get it from having sex. And he very much wants to close the bathhouses. And there's, again, this conflict, sexual freedom versus safety. And Lily Tomlin makes the point, like, they're human and they're scared. And that pretty much settles that conversation. We also find out that AIDS is in the blood supply and it's reaching hemophiliacs.
The blood industry people are all about the bottom line and short-term thinking, which would seem to be out of sync with each other, but that's business for you.
Basically, they're like, we need to find someone who has gotten a blood donation and trace it back to the donation, and they find a baby.
Oh, God. And this is just so incredibly sad.
The baby is sick because the baby has been given blood with AIDS in it. And they're trying to find a donor, any donor who had HIV. And we meet Steve Martin, who is playing the brother of someone who has passed away from AIDS, who was closeted and gay, and they're pretending that he wasn't. And they had his death certificate signed off on by the family doctor.
There's a name that he has written in there as repairman, but it's actually a doctor who works on AIDS. Steve Martin is so good in this cameo. He is understated, and you see that sort of resentment that his brother didn't come forward, mixed with other things that would have been typical to the time, but it's just an understated performance as someone who misses their brother. And there's a cameo from Angelica Houston around here, which I missed.
She's the nurse to the baby.
Yes, but I'm grateful for this Steve Martin appearance. And cut back to a meeting with the CDC and people from the blood industry and parents. There is a character that I will call Hemophiliac Mom, who wants everything tested because her kid got AIDS. And basically, so if you're unfamiliar, what they get to get the plasma, they put a bunch of blood together and refine down. So lots of people's blood was going in. And also, one of the things that gay men would do in the 70s to prove themselves as civic-minded people was they made a point to donate blood. Randy Shilt touches on this. So hemophiliac mom is played by the lady doctor with a cane from ER. I was going to call her Cane Lady, but I decided that that was disrespectful because her character was a doctor, and if someone has put in the time and cash and effort to get a medical degree, you should damn well address them by the title they achieved. So I'm going to proceed on the assumption that this actress's first name is Doctor and her last name is Cane. And also, Sarah, I don't know if I've told you this before, I have no business doing a movie podcast without you.
I have no business doing a history podcast without you. And I would just add here that Dr. Kane is an actress named Laura Innes, who is very talented. And they name the disease acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
Like, let's rename a thing so we can pretend we got something done. When they get to this scene where they finally name the disease, there's also this feeling of when you're expecting a beat around something being named, like they're saying, hey, let's stop calling this disease the Quarrymen. We should call it the Beatles. Oh, bureaucracy. Once again, the best thing you can do is rename a thing.
I'm a veteran of a few organizations where there were board meetings where people like to hear themselves talk, which is to say I served on the boards of my college theater organizations. I have to say that in this meeting, which resembled many of those meetings, they are able to get a lot more done than I would expect at a meeting with this many people yelling at each other with this many sort of cross purposes. And Modine finally gets up and shames them. Like he says some things about how people are dying and they need to deal with this and they need to figure out solutions. And they are all taken by this and realize their true purpose and what they need to be thinking about. That's how shame used to do stuff. It doesn't work anymore. We see more broadcast footage because there continues to be a vacuum of leadership and information. There is some movement, but there's still also a lot of just shittiness involving people, losing their housing or, people showing up to an accident scene and not knowing what to do because the person who was in the accident has AIDS and everyone's like, well, we need to call hazmat, and people show up like the end of ET.
This is also covered in the first and second season of Ryan Murphy's excellent series Pose, where you see what AIDS was like in the 80s from that too.
We cut to the need to get some more motion going on this. We find a woman who is played by Swoosie Kurtz, who has gotten AIDS through blood donations. And Charles Martin Smith has to break to her that she has AIDS.
I don't know which family Swoosie Kurtz and her husband are supposed to be in this. They're addressed as Mr. and Mrs. Johnstone, but the way they come into it is, I think Charles Martin Smith or one of the CDC scientists says to Selma Dritz, to get any money for this, we would need someone who is in, I don't know how they phrase it, like God's Rolodex or something. And Lily Tomlin pulls out this envelope. This is a very well-off couple. They're like exuding having just that quiet, we've always had money tasteful about everything, but she's clearly quite ill. And there's just the sense that these people are surrounded by everything and it doesn't matter because she doesn't have her health. I guess I'm going on about this because Swoosie Kurtz gives a 4-minute masterclass in acting within this movie, and I was weeping. The times that I've seen this, I've just been at like an easy E level of cry of tears from watching just this 4-minute scene of Swoosie Kurtz wondering, like, why am I so sick? And finding out the way that her husband looks at the piece of paper, it just like as if he can do anything about it by questioning it. And then you see her comforting him. And it is so real and so understated and so beautiful. I can infer so many things from this.
It's tremendous acting, on really efficient writing where you get a very full picture of a lot of people in a very limited period of time. She calls out what needs to be called out, where she said, "Are you telling me they were giving AIDS to people?" And sure enough, that is what's happening. We have been able to shame people into action. We find out that the election is coming, and don't worry, Americans, stay stupid and mean. The French find the virus. Go the French. Go the Pasteur Institute. And then we find out that Bill Krause he finds a spot of Kaposi sarcoma on his ankle. It's awful and it's devastating. And then Gallo is being a petty bitch because the CDC sent the French samples to test their virus against, and he's being a baby about it, and he's decided he's going to cut the CDC off because his feelings are hurt. It's awful to watch these people find out that they have it. It feels like a horror movie. It feels like a zombie movie where they're like, oh shit, I've got this.
Because again, look at pictures of what late stage AIDS patients looked like at the time, and you'll see, like, they know their body is about to become a horror movie.
Literally everything is going to be taken from you. And it could be months, it could be a couple of years. But anyway, speaking of selfish and horrible, Gallo is being a baby. And he's cutting off the CDC, and he's basically like, I'm pissed. And Modine shows up to his office and is like, it's supposed to be us against the virus. And Gallo finally concedes he'll show up to meet with the French, and he does, but he kicks Modine out of the meeting. So they come to an agreement, but Gallo is really shitty to the CDC and their contributions and kind of cuts them out of the announcement about the discovery because he's a resentful piece of shit. Although a good scientist.
Like, you can see with Aldo's character, he loves all the little trappings that he gets. He loves his cable knit sweater that he wears to play tennis at the club. Like, he loves all of these trappings of being a star insofar as scientists go. There's this one scene where he's getting an award and you just see this studied humble brag. He believes his own hype, and you can scarcely believe it given what a jerk he's just been to the CDC people. The CDC people who are doing their nerdy little short sleeves with a tie karate chop run into the vending machine to try to get those peanut butter cookies out in the 4 minutes they have to pretend they're eating lunch.
Modine mostly takes it in stride. He's like, listen, like phase 1 was finding it, and we found it. Now we need to educate and prevent. And he says we need $37 million a year, which Saul Rubinek's like, that's not going to happen under the Reagan administration. We don't like prevention in America. And Modine makes the point, that's 15 cents per person to make the population safer, which makes that embarrassingly small. He's misdirecting his energy a little bit here because he can. Like, he's really pissed off at Saul Rubinek, who is just the bearer of bad news. It's the 80s. We hate people. We still do. But we really hated people in the 80s. And we find out that I had a hard time sort of following this Michigas here with Gallo and the French, but they had the same sample or something.
There seems to have been some bad faith here.
Yes, for sure. We see that, Matthew Modine goes to visit Bill in the hospital. Bill is dying, and he grabs him and he says, I used to be afraid of dying. Now I am afraid of what happens to the people who live.
But in leading up to this, Bill Krause has been so articulate, but whatever the neurological effects are of his collapse, he's talking in gibberish, and he finally gets out a sentence when he's speaking to Matthew Modine where he says, "Can you please," and he says some word that sounds Norwegian, but Modine figures out that he's asking for his glasses.
Yeah. And he asks Matthew Modine, he says, "Can we still stop this?"
Also, this has a wonderfully understated use of the flashback, which is in that the Ebola scene at the very beginning in Africa. You see where a dying patient reaches out and grabs Matthew Modine's hand, and you see that flashback in Bill Krause grabbing him. And because it is subtly done, it is not thumping you upside the head with a callback in terms of this is the character's journey. This is not the table saw from Walk the Line.
And it's like, can we still stop this? No.
We still don't have a cure for AIDS. We have PrEP. We have whatever the cocktails evolved into.
We have made AIDS not a death sentence.
Yes, so long as you live in the right part of the world. And in some cases, that means orienting your entire life around making sure that you have work that carries insurance.
And we find out a couple of things about people when this finishes. We find out that Bill died in 1986. We find out that Matthew Modine eventually left the CDC and wants to find a cure for AIDS. We see that these incredibly valiant doctors continue to fight the good fight on behalf of people in this country. And then we go into the devastating closing montage, which is set to the Elton John song, The Last Song, which is a song about a person dying of AIDS and reconnecting with his father as he is dying. And this song is heartbreaking. And then we get a montage of just some of the bright lights that were taken from this world and what was taken from us because of inaction and misinformation and carelessness. Also, some of the allies that really helped. I'm going to run through their names. So we have Bobby Campbell, Ryan White, Rock Hudson, Anthony Perkins, Tina Chow, Rudolph Nureyev, Arthur Ashe, Michael Bennett, Liberace, Freddie Mercury, Princess Diana, who was an ally, Elizabeth Taylor, also an ally, Elizabeth Glazer, Magic Johnson, Larry Kramer, Allison Gertz, Max Robinson, Helston, Willie Smith, Perry Ellis, Peter Allen, Steve Rubell, Keith Haring, Stuart McKinney, Denham Elliott, Brad Davis, Amanda Blake, Robert Reed, Michel Foucault, Tom Waddell. And as of January 2025, Magic Johnson is the only person on this list who is still alive.
Oh, yeah. Also, Magic Johnson's diagnosis, I think this was announced in 1992, but he was someone who he was diagnosed just as the drugs were finally getting a little bit better. He was someone who had a ton of money. He also had a substantial body to be slowly taken down. So, but at the time, it was scary.
We do some awards talk?
Yes, let's do some awards talk.
This was nominated for 14 Emmy Awards, and it won for Best Editing, Casting, and Made for TV Movie. Received 2 Golden Globe nominations, one for Matthew Modine and one for Best TV Movie. 9 Cable Ace Award nominations. It won, Ian McKellen won for Best Actor, and it won for Writing. I think also just wanted to throw out there that worth noting is one of the nominees from the film for supporting actor was Lawrence Monason, who is in one scene. He is the actor. He is the young man who's talking about how all of his friends are dead, and he's talking about the sixes and seeing the numbers, and he's just so alone. And it's one scene, and it's very devastating.
You know what? If you're gonna give someone an award for one scene, I'd rather it had gone to Swoosie Kurtz, because that is like a like a hyperactive mental scene, and we don't reward that kind of understatedness where someone builds an entire life and is non-histrionic.
You'll be happy to know that Swoosie Kurtz was among the nominees for a Cable Ace Award for that film, for that performance.
Good.
So, and she was also nominated for an Emmy Award for her performance in this film. So don't you worry. It remains well regarded.
All right. We didn't highlight any choice dialogue. It's an excellent script. It's a very natural script. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to issues specific to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So, for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I don't know why I only gave it an 8. There is a lot of really good disease makeup in this, and I should have rated it higher, but I don't let myself change these things once I've done them. For acting and casting, I gave it an 8. For passage of time, I gave it a 6. Sometimes it is a little bit unclear how much time is passing, although they do nicely tell you what year it is and what the butcher's bill is. For costuming, I gave it a 6.5 because it isn't one of the ones that is trying to impress me, so that's not a thing that I'm going to swoon for, given what I think of in biopics. For quality of the script, I gave it an 8.5. For accuracy, I gave it a 5 because we know better about Patient Zero now, I guess. Storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it a 7. For production value, I gave it an 8. For production and direction decision-making, I gave it an 8. And for Do We Care, I gave it a 10, which brings us to 7.5.
Okay. Outward appearances, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it a 10. Passage of time, I gave it a 7. Costuming, 7. Quality of the script, 8. Accuracy, 6. Storytelling, 7. Production value, 8. Production direction decision making, 8. And Do We Care, 10. Mine comes out to an 8.0.
Okay, so that's
7.75.
7.75, but we loved this movie.
Oh, it's on HBO. You should see it. Everyone should watch it. It takes 2 hours and a couple more minutes after that out of your life. It is very important, both just like from the communications industry standards of understanding like the birth of prestige television. And it's, I don't want to say entertaining, but it moves and it educates, and it does so in a way that is very compelling.
Yes, and in that 7.75 is fair. You know what? I think that second opinion is for things where we are so head over heels or so repulsed that we need to tear down anyone who disagrees with us.
This is a very good score.
And again, this was the 4th and final film in our Pride Month 2025 series. So other stuff that you should watch instead, I would say read Randy Shilt's. The Harvey Milk biography is very good. The and the band Played On is excellent, even though he was wrong about Patient Zero. His writing is still an example of everything that literary journalism and biography ought to be. Also, there's a great documentary on Rock Hudson from HBO that you can watch on the streaming service formerly known as HBO Max. Also, watch The Normal Heart, unless the insufferable actor Mark Ruffalo has recently inserted himself into political discourse in a manner you find annoying. If Mark Ruffalo has irritated you, I absolve you of watching The Normal Heart. Sarah, what would you recommend?
So yes, watch this movie. I would just a couple of like rando things I'm going to recommend here that came up. The Untouchables, if you enjoy your happy warrior Charles Martin Smith. I would also recommend the documentary How to Survive a Plague, which was made by David France. It's about the early years of HIV and AIDS and about the creation of ACT UP and other activist organizations. I
For the Hollywood Queers Best Gal Pal, listen to the You Must Remember This episode called Liz Loves Monty.
Also go back and watch 90210. It's so good. The last 3 seasons are a little tough to swallow, but it's so good.
Sarah, can you tell everyone about our Patreon baby?
Our podcast baby is a podcast toddler. We launched a Patreon really just an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you. That's platform hosting costs, recording costs, research costs. Rena does all the research. I don't do anything except go on the internet when I'm on the train. And occasionally we have to order a book off the internet or pay for movie rentals. So we're offering shout outs and access to our cursed first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us now. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who signed up already.
Thank you, Gates.
Thank you, Gates. So if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see our official episode ratings for all of the movies that we have done so far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week for this year's July 4th special, when we will be talking about Malcolm X with our guest filmmaker Brandon Wilson. We are dropping Malcolm X on Plymouth Rock to celebrate the 4th. Last year, our 4th episode wound up being Cobb, where we had some negative things to say about the nature of power and money in America. And originally, I had scheduled 1776 because I was feeling optimistic at the time. And I was like, you know what, maybe we'll do something that's a feel-good for July 4th. But I didn't feel like that this year. So I have bumped 1776 probably to November Politics Month. And we're getting Malcolm X.
Yes. And there's no more fitting tribute to America in 2025 than watching this movie, which is an utterly brilliant movie. I don't know how I'm going to keep it short, because I can talk about Spike Lee for years. Anyway, it's morning in America.
Fuck that shit. No, it's nighttime in New York. And New York is still New York. So good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.